The Freedom of Hitching West with Tim.
We visited Dan and Jocelyn in Grayson. Great vistas of time, beauty, and Saskatchewan.
Sandra Birdsall was celebrating a new novel. In Calgary, we visited my brother Wilf and his wife Karen.
In Vernon, we stayed with my folks. They took us up to Adams River to see the salmon run. It was amazing. All those red fish fighting to get back and die.
Vancouver. And walking around a crazy VW on Robson Street. In Richmond, we went biking all Sunday afternoon.
Found our way to the grown-up house and had dinner with Kayla. Walking Commercial Drive, we saw posters and went to a fine show.
We cycled through the city like tourists and checked out Kanzine. Tim had whipped up version 1 of Hitchhiking is for Seniors.
To Portland, our first new city. We enjoyed walking all over.
Shallon had put us in touch with a guy named Sam. We stayed a few nights at his groovy coop.
Still exploring, we discovered their version of Arts Junction. SCRAP stood for School and Community Reuse Action Project.
To the coastal highway south, Yashatz to Crescent City. Getting the big ride with Noah all the way into San Francisco.
Di was returning for a third time, but it was all new to me. She was rediscovering a favorite city and enjoying showing me around.
We walked and bussed and explored a lot. We found their scrap, which stood for Scroungers Center for Reusable Art Parts.
Loved the art everywhere, and the messages, and the amazing Clarion Alley mural project in the Mission District. On our way to get my zine into the store Modern Times.
There was street art everywhere, so much to see.
So when she needed a rest, Di sat down in City Lights and looked at a book about street art.
In our hostel, we met a Vancouver cyclist taking part in Critical Mass. It was Halloween and everyone was dressing for action.
It was crazy down at Embarcadero as the bikers massed. We walked around looking at costumes and digging the vibes. Over to Auckland for a weekend visit with cats and a picnic with Lorna. A trip to the Bulb with Lorna and Zach.
The Bulb is a peninsula built of construction debris sticking into the bay north of Berkeley. For 50 years, it was the Albany dumps or landfill. Lots of wildness, junk art, and sculptures. People living in the bush. There's apparently even a library.
It was a lovely walk for us and the pugs. Their dogs cute as small ugly children. Lots of messages.
Next day, we walked to AK Press to visit Lorna at work. She insisted we wear the gear to DownUnder, doing PR for AK Press.
Zach came and gave us a ride into San Francisco on his way to work at the Rainbow Foods Co-op.
Our last days in North America, walked the Haight-Ashbury streets. We helped the Giants win the pennant. Watched the annual Day of the Dead parade.
A solemn end to time on these shores. For the big flight to Sydney.
We went straight to an awful party house hostel. Then we found our way to refuge at the anarchist Jura bookshop.
Went to the harbor and onto a ferry. I held on tight. On our way to Sunday afternoon at Manly Beach. I had my first swim on this trip in the Southern Hemisphere.
On Monday, we got out of Sydney. What a relief. On the road again, hitching west to Yass, where we used our tent for the first time since leaving home.
The capital city, Canberra. Grand planning, open spaces, lots of museums and galleries, government people. The whole country obsessed with cricket, playing England for an urn of ashes.
We camped and hitched south along the coast to Melbourne, a fine cultured city with cool, radical folks doing good stuff. Like the Irene Community Arts Centre and the Loophole Community Centre, a library like Hunto, and a store where we got more zines and I got a t-shirt.
We met the Food Not Bombs crew, some new Nate and Laura. We saw art and funky folks everywhere, including a karaoke Waylon and Willie wannabe.
Out of Melbourne and along the Great Ocean Road on the south coast, westward, always the blue ocean on our left, we camped with koalas at Kennett River.
We got to another Portland, a funny little industrial port. I swam a lot and Di got busy with a project. She had a bird of an idea. Let it go and now it flies with the Tweet Art Project.
We hitched northwest. It was a long day getting to Adelaide.
But we got there and had a pretty cool weekend.
Our month in Australia was almost up. We had to hitch straight back to Sydney, staying on the bus route in case we needed to buy a ride in order to get to the airport on time.
We had great rides and got there early. One driver making us stop for this photo with the dog on the tucker box, hero of Aussie folk song lore.
We had time enough in Sydney to thoroughly clean our tent to get through New Zealand customs, walk around a bit, and crash out on a bench outside the airport the night before our flight to New Zealand.
Auckland, New Zealand. Laura met us and we camped at the halfway house.
We hitched north to the Bay of Islands looking for sunshine.
Across the bay in Russell, Di took in a workshop on printmaking, and then we walked around the town before taking the ferry back to Pattaya, a real tourist town. 2 cruise ships full of seniors were swarming the town one day.
We had a quiet campsite by the river near the Waitangi Treaty Grounds. Hitching back to Auckland, we visit Kawakawa, home of the famous Hunditvasa toilets. From there, we had a great ride with trucker Dave, who stopped for a bite beside this large sculpture art studio, then took us into downtown Auckland.
And got back in plenty of time for Laura's Maori Culture Immersion Program graduation, an intense ceremony. 3 hours of only Maori language and music, and Laura's emotional speech in Maori.
Tim worked on his Aussie zine while I went swimming with folks from the halfway house. They had a house meeting out back while we hid in their kitchen. This art is by Glenn of the Underwater Collective.
We hitched south past some kauri tree art to Lake Taupo and past this range of jandals on a roadside fence, and then all the way to capital city Wellington for the ferry to the South Island. Cool weather and rain, hitching like mad to go see Nate.
He only had a few days left in Westport before moving back to Auckland. We got to stay with him in his rustic barn, an outdoor shower, and loo. He was a great host that weekend, showing us around the town, old coal mines and hills, the beach, Cape Foulwind, and the seal colony. He called this wild coast his home for a year. We toured the area with him. As he said his goodbyes to places and friends such as Donna in Granity, who made a flax flower for me. The flax you see here is used by the Maori folks for weaving.
He'd been taking blacksmithing Donna had taken it before him. They talked about the course and the people. Nate was sad to be done, leaving this place and going back to university.
We had to get away from the Rain Coast and rode the train east, through the mountains and onto the Canterbury Plains and Christchurch. We stayed at the jailhouse hostel and were welcomed to Christchurch by a full moon and a total eclipse. It was their summer solstice.
We got a room in a real house on Cashel Street with bikes, so from there we explored, saw evidence of dandy punks, rode out to the beach on Xmas Day for a swim.
We enjoyed many cafes, languid Avon river punters, and felt a Boxing Day earthquake aftershock that woke us rudely.
There were already damaged buildings everywhere you looked, enough to pedal you up a wall, but even the alleys had funky bars and hidden spots for good salt-of-the-earth type folks. Much to see and do, lots of galleries and street sculpture. They have an arts center of studios and shops, and some Stairway to Heaven sculpture in the Christchurch Art Gallery.
And lots of damaged buildings, so many bricks come loose, ruins everywhere and barricades, temporary structures to shore up the loose bricks, inspections and reopenings. And remember, all this was before the big shake in February.
We cycled off into the bucolic botanical gardens and looked at flora, sat on a bench and relaxed, while the local duck family came by.
This is a fossilized fish in wood on a dock. One day we cycled around the estuary to the south end of Brighton Beach and walked the miles back along the beach to New Brighton town.
Saw a beautiful and sacred Maori marae on the way back. Next day we tried to bike over a mountain to Taylor's Mistake. Good name for a beach we couldn't get to. But we enjoyed Sumner Beach on the way back. We saw this op shop, and I did some rewarding dumpstering, good yogurt and pies.
Back in Christchurch at our Cashel Street house, we had a potluck with our French and German housemates.
Next day I heard that damn Bon Jovi song, and then I saw this car on our street with the license plate. Life is too weird.
We had to get out of Christchurch and hitched a ride with the amazing Wolfgang all the way to the mountain town of Alexandra.
Next day one of our rides was with Tim Shadbolt, mayor of Invercargill. Later we went down a road full of rain and ended up in Mossburn, a gloomy night in a country hotel.
We got to Te Anau, a very tourist-driven town not unlike Banff, but I took the boat tour to Doubtful Sound.
Next day, our first ride out of Te Anau was Wolfgang. We had a fun reunion with the cool old German who took us to Lumsden, a quiet town just like the one in Saskatchewan. When we got to Invercargill, Mayor Tim offered to meet us. He gave us a tour of his town and set us up in a house that is the boyhood home of writer Dan Davin. Now the house is administered by a literary trust and inhabited by Matt, who enjoys the library, as did we. Matt told us straight up he was a bit OCD, liked his sheets clean. I just like to watch them dry.
We walked around town and explored the park, the old buildings, the junk, and the recycle store at the entrance to the town dump.
We took a little side trip to the south coast town of Bluff and walked the foreshore, checked out a very cool private gallery.
We were ready to leave Invercargill and called Mayor Tim to say goodbye. He showed us the filming location for Two Little Boys, in which he will play himself, 20 years ago in his first term as mayor.
Then he drove us out to the highway and on, talking. He wanted us to camp at Curio Bay, and so he drove us all the way.
Then he went back to his town, leaving us to explore this amazing out-of-the-way spot that we might not have tried to get to without his guidance. We camped on a hillside on a point and went down one side to explore the petrified forest stumps while the tide was out.
We kind of went crazy taking pictures. So much seashore stuff. Curio Bay's curiosities. On a sunny but cool afternoon with a fresh wind coming up from Antarctica. This was definitely the most remote spot we ever got to camp at. The southernmost coast of mainland New Zealand. It is almost as far south as we are north in Winnipeg. It's about the 47th parallel.
Eventually, we went back over the hill to the other side, called Porpoise Bay. It had the sandy beach with sleeping sea lions. I caught a glimpse of dolphins in the bay.
We walked the beach for miles, too cool to swim, and came back to find two sea lions having a tussle.
At dusk, we got back to the rocky side to wait and watch the penguins come in from sea. One by one they swam in and slowly waddled across the rocks to their nests and mates in the bushes.
Dunedin, a very civilized city, decorated toilets, cool anarcho folks, old buildings, micro beer, and the smallest bar in the universe.
We went to the beach to see surfing contests, but decided to go explore and started hiking towards the famous Tunnel Beach. A wild, secluded spot made accessible by a tunnel dug by the wealthy William Cargill so his teenage daughters could swim without being seen by the local peasants back in the 1800s.
Nowadays, it's one of the few free places for anyone who can walk, and it is worth the hike. Amazing eroded rocks and crazy cliffs.
We had come so far to find this spot, and were so glad that a radio station manager back in Christchurch had recommended it.
After a bit, we went down the tunnel to the tiny beach and explored. Di stuck a toe in and made grand statements of wisdom and awe.
While Tim hid in a cave.
Despite the chilly day, I just had to go in, my southernmost swim ever, then as cold as stone. I clothed and ran up the 72 tunnel steps.
North to Oamaru.
Another cool old seaside town with a curious mix of people into the past. The steampunk culture. The weird younger set dress Victorian and make fanciful machines, while the oldsters have their own radio station and act as DJs, playing somewhat dated pop music.
We just wanted a beer at the Criterion Hotel, so we tied up our horses and hung out. Later wandered the streets of this ghostly sort of exchange district. Back up north to a camp out near Blenheim with the old guard of Kiwi left-wing peaceniks and anti-American protesters.
Posing as death, feeling depressed with the way the whole town ignored our demonstration against the nearby Waihope spy base.
2 years ago, 3 men had snuck in and slashed one of the giant dome covers and waited on site to be arrested. They've been acquitted. One of them was Catholic worker Father Peter, who spoke. He was good.
We shook our fists figuratively. Actually, I sat on the fence holding a banner.
Blenheim is a conservative town. These folks don't much care or are proud of this American-led international base, which listens in on Southern Hemisphere electronic communications.
Enough of cold and rainy weather. We went to Nelson and camped for a whole week at Tahunanui Beach. Met the locals who admired my luscious beard, or so they said in rhyme. We climbed a hill in the heat to stand at the very center of New Zealand.
Then took a cooling dip in the town's stream, explored this arts and crafts town.
And went for pie. First meat, then fruit, at a place called Kapai.
From Nelson all the way to the northwest corner of the South Island, to small town Collingwood and their Sunday afternoon food fair, locally cooked and harvested.
It was an extremely not touristy Kiwi experience, listening to local music, eating and watching four-way tug-of-war with a community that pulls together.
Back through Takaka to Picton, where we camped with a weka, another of New Zealand's flightless birds, then to Wellington, which happened to be having the annual Rugby Sevens, a wild dress-up weekend for fans, much drinking and carrying on.
We ducked into a craft gallery and got our red and black fix. Visited the activists' community house with library called Revolting Books, and went to the CD release show by the band The Sing Songs, which includes our friend Nate's sister, Michelle.
Looked at old buildings and looked down on the new harbour from the giant and impressive Te Papa Museum.
Inside one of the museum's galleries, we got to see an early Kiwi art film. Outside, some animated folks, including a group of sculptors, at work for all to see.
Downtown on Cuba Street, we ran into Steve, a local who loved the Canadian accent, and told us he had met someone from Winnipeg. Did we know Paolo? Amazing.
Steve and others had started a free store in an old food kiosk. We got some cookies and chocolate.
From there, up the east coast to Napier, we got to use bikes for a day and then hitched along the sunny coast to Gisborne, which claims to be the city first to see the sun.
It might be a scary sort of town, even the trees are camouflaged. But turns out they are introduced London plane trees. And we got a campsite on the beach with a view of young Nick's Head.
We started branching out and putting down roots and lazing about. It was a relaxing place.
Even the public library was a beautiful temple with this amazing stained glass historical mural. We had a good Valentine's Day stay there.
We met DJ Nick at a local Maori radio station on our way around the East Cape, a route less traveled by tourists.
We got to camp at a pretty wild rustic campground at Te Aroa Enjoyed the afternoon exploring and found our way to the beach. This was sort of our North Island equivalent of South Island's Curio Bay, but the only wildlife we saw was a lone Canada goose.
Next day was hot and slow, a dead afternoon trying to stay in the shade. I was still saying, "Where's Wolfgang?" But we got a great ride into Whakatane.
This is a town with a big rock candy mountain attitude. Perfect place to phone in to CKUW's fund drive. And Di made a pledge to Black Mass.
The town had a cafe and a small cave to visit, then a long, tiresome day of hitching, but we finally got to Hay Beach.
We were now on the Coromandel Peninsula, an area of beaches within easy driving distance of the big city of Auckland. We walked the beach and marveled at the rocks and trees, and we found the path up through the hills along the coast to get to the very secluded Cathedral Cove.
This amazing cove with two beaches connected by a natural tunnel was well worth the treacherous hike around barricades and down washed-out trails, including a slippery slope where the stairs used to be.
I had a swim while Di did some sketching. Then we had a shower.
Everywhere in New Zealand you see the silver fern. It's the national symbol.
From Hahe, one short ride, and then we took a little ferry to Whiti City and stayed at the On the Beach Backpacker and spent a Sunday afternoon relaxing. Here we have the Flat family floating downstream together. From there we went west around the Coromandel Peninsula. I had a great ride into the town of Coromandel with a local auctioneer named Jim Peacock.
He really wanted to show us around and took us on a hike to see the giant kauri trees. He also offered to take us back to his cottage for the night, but that would have meant backtracking, so we declined.
Next day we saw a mantis praying for our journey mercies and got into Auckland safely, back at the halfway house with the chickens.
We had a few days in the city with the hypodermic needle, as Laura called it.
We checked out the Auckland Art Gallery, their biggest music store, and went out with Nate to a bar to see Jason Webley.
Some city scenes reminded us of CKUW and the bike dump.
I'd have to say this is their version of the Forks. We went over to Devonport and browsed in used bookstores. That's where I found a copy of Mayor Tim's rare old radical book. We saw a free fringe play in a park back at the halfway house, letting the sleepy dogs lie. We borrowed a car from those good folks.
Beautiful public toilets everywhere. These are in Helensville. On our way north, we stopped in Whangarei for some spelunking to look for glowworms. We were on our way to a country cottage in a converted wool shed, relaxing with Scrabble. We stayed 2 nights.
And spent the day going up to Cape Renga, New Zealand's northernmost tip, where the Tasman Sea meets the Pacific Ocean. So very far away from everywhere else.
Rose was reading in the shade, so I had a chat. We tried to explore the giant sand dunes, but they were burning hot, and we foolishly left our shoes in the car.
That was at the north end of 90 Mile Beach, which is actually 60 miles long. Di drove us back down to the south end where we hung out for a while. I had my last swim.
Back at the wool shed, rustic living at its finest, with TV and other amenities,
We saw our last cow of New Zealand, waving goodbye. Back at the halfway house, packing up. Then Laura took us to the airport. So tanned and rested, we were ready to come back to North America.
We stayed in downtown San Francisco and visited a very cool library, the private collection of Megan and Rick Prellinger.
But San Francisco's coolest folks are from Winnipeg.
More street art. And we went over to Auckland again, this time to join a rally with Angela Davis, an action against the city's racial profiling tactics.
Next day in San Francisco was very spring-like. We checked out art shows, farmers markets, and found the old Fillmore Music Hall of hippie days. But we ended up going to a hip-hop show organized by Selassie, whose message is, "We all we got."
We discovered a real blacksmith shop for Nate just before we got on the Greyhound bus going east to Salt Lake City.
Spent a day exploring this interesting city and hung out in the amazing bookstore cafe, saw a sign of spring before it started snowing again, and a library full of zines. Even this Mormon town has a punk house.
Our last planned stop was a visit to Colorado Springs to meet Pete, an activist who runs a free bike clinic for homeless folks.
He and his partner Mary are amazing people, living simply and peacefully in contrast to the local war culture. On a clear day, they can see Pikes Peak.